The Samsung S95B is one of the most hyped TVs of 2022, but is it the best OLED TV you can buy? Let's find out. The S95B is Samsung's first consumer OLED, and it's not just any OLED, it is a QD-OLED, meaning it has a quantum dot layer, which is tech typically found on LED-based displays. The presence of the quantum dot layer allows Samsung to push the brightness boundaries of OLED technology higher than what you're going to find with the competition, but we're going to get into that in just a moment. Here's what you need to know about this TV's specs. It's a native 4K display. It utilizes Samsung's Neural Quantum Processor 4K, has support for Dolby Atmos, but not Dolby Vision. Fans of HDR content, aren't we all, can still enjoy HDR10+, adaptive HDR10+, gaming, HDR10+, and HLG content. You get 4 HDMI inputs. All of them are HDMI 2.1 spec, which is bound to please next-gen content fans and gamers. Speaking of gaming, there is a native refresh rate of 120 Hz, and it has a host of gaming-centric features like ALLM, VRR, and more. The S95B uses Samsung's own Smart TV Hub, giving viewers access to streaming apps like Netflix, HBO Max, Apple TV, and more right out of the box. You have support for Alexa, Google Assistant, and more. Existing Samsung SOUNDBAR owners can connect to the S95B wirelessly and enjoy Dolby Atmos content, as well as Samsung's own Q Symphony without needing to connect an additional HDMI cable to the display. For a complete breakdown of all of the specs and features, please check out our links below. Now, the design doesn't appear too different from other OLEDs. It's minimal and ungodly thin. Thankfully, and a bit of a departure for Samsung, the S95B doesn't feature the brand's One Connect box, meaning all of the display's input and output options are located on the back of the TV. To me, this is a far better solution. As far as OLEDs go, nothing about the build quality or design stood out to me as being particularly noteworthy, good or bad. Because the S95B is only available in 55 and 65-inch sizes, we did not install it on our main wall. That's just for the big boys. Now, be careful because the included stand mount is a little bit trickier than others, and it's definitely trickier to install on an ultra-thin TV like this one. But once we got it on and set on our credenza, I paired the S990B soundbar we just reviewed in order to test the wireless connection with the S95B. The TV automatically detected the presence of the bar and added all of its features to the television menus. The included TV remote then took control of both the TV and the bar without needing, well, to pull out my phone, which is another bonus. The S95B, when paired with a compatible Samsung soundbar like the Q990B, has Q Symphony support, and this allows both the TV and the soundbar speakers to work as one. I experienced zero problems with the wireless connection and Q Symphony, and it's one of my favorite features of Samsung TVs because they really make setup with their TVs and soundbars idiot-proof. Getting to what you're really here for, the picture. The Samsung is two things. It is bright and it is wildly inaccurate. One of the first things I noticed is just how blue this TV is out of the box. It's clear Samsung is leaning heavily into the blue OLED light source in order to get the maximum brightness for both SD and HDR content. Additionally, and this is important, as you adjust the TV's dynamic brightness and/or contrast settings, you will be affecting the grayscale and color balance. The more you turn them up, the more blue the image is going to appear. So, if you want maximum brightness from the S95B, know that a full professional calibration is required for accurate picture and color. I measured the 4 main picture profiles out of the box, and none could be considered calibrated from the factory. Dynamic and standard were the worst, with a delta E or margin of error of 17 and 16, respectively. Keep in mind, anything below 3 is considered calibrated, so neither of these profiles are going to fit the bill. Plus, both skewed heavily towards blue. Movie and filmmaker mode were closer to right with a delta E of 9 and were less blue, though they traded blue for green, and I'm not sure that was better. Thankfully, the S95B can be calibrated and actually calibrates quite nicely. Using the movie profile as my starting point, I was able to rein the Samsung in and achieve a delta E for both grayscale and color of 0.5, which is almost as good as what I was able to achieve with our LG C2 OLED. Yeah, we still have it. But, and this is a big but, calibrating the Samsung to perfection cuts the light output considerably to around 180 nits with SD content and about 210 to 220 nits with HDR content. Again, I'm talking about true edge-to-edge brightness here. Of course, if you want to do small window brightness runs to see the Samsung's peak brightness, you can, and our sample easily hit 1000 nits with HDR content, making it nearly as bright as our Sony X95K, which is a mini LED backlit display. While peak brightness is all well and good, and the Samsung is very impressive in this regard, don't expect 1000 nits of brightness edge to edge. Not with this or any OLED, because you're not going to get it. Regardless, as far as OLEDs go, the S95 is technically the brightest one we've seen so far. I suspect one of the main reasons people are considering the Samsung over the LG is because of its brightness, and in order to get there, certain concessions with respect to accuracy sometimes need to be made. Whether I manually did the calibration or I used Samsung's own smart calibration feature, which totally works by the way, in order for the display to maintain a brighter than average image, both blacks and highlights, they get crushed, resulting in detail in both light and dark scenes being lost. This was most evident when watching Netflix, The School for Good and Evil. Properly calibrated, I could see into the darkest parts of the film's many Gothic sets and easily see detail in the evil school's darker wardrobe, but I'm not gonna lie, the image lacked punch and looked dim as hell. When I adjusted my settings to go for brightness above absolute accuracy, the image just leapt off the screen. But doing this sacrifices some of the finer details which got lost. I could get past it and even enjoy the presentation, but it is frustrating that a better balance between sheer light output and absolute color fidelity couldn't be struck 100% of the time. I'm confident many of you flat out won't even care given how particularly punchy and saturated the image is. Just know that it's not technically right all of the time or with all content. Now, obviously, things like local dimming and blooming are moot. After all, this is an OLED. But one thing I don't normally spend a lot of time on is scaling or processing, as most TVs nowadays, they're pretty great. But I have to say, watching 720p broadcasts and even HD content scaled to the Samsung native 4K resolution, it didn't look great. In direct comparison to our Sony X95K, which admittedly is a much larger 85-inch model, I expected the Samsung to look better, cleaner, and sharper, but it didn't. I honestly do not like how the scaled imagery looks on this particular Samsung, which is weird because their 8K display, the QN900B, had some of the best scaling I've ever seen. While motion was smooth, when watching sports broadcasts, lower thirds and wide crowd shots, they looked soft, even out of focus on the Samsung when scaling from 720p or 1080p to 4K, which was shocking. I also felt as if Samsung's own OS was lagging in the speed department compared to the QN900B we tested earlier this year. But on a more positive note, gaming on the S95B was pretty great. I played the new Modern Warfare 2 as well as Overwatch 2 on our PS5 and was completely immersed. The gaming picture profile, it's plenty bright and it's not too dissimilar from the dynamic or standard profiles, honestly, but it does add functionality like VRR and ALLM, both of which, according to the TV, were functioning properly. And I say this because I'm not a competitive gamer and I'm pretty sure that any of my performance issues I experienced were my own fault and not because the TV introduced anything like additional lag. So let's just get into comparisons. First, we have not yet gotten our hands on the Sony A95K, which is obviously comparable. Nevertheless, we haven't seen it in our own home, so I am going to limit my remarks. The Sony is more expensive at just under $3,000 at the time of this review, so in terms of value, the Samsung appears to have a leg up. That said, the A95K does have Sony's cognitive processing, which I think is better. Arguably the best in the business, but is it worth paying an extra $1,000+ for? That's a tougher call, especially when you consider we are talking about 65-inch OLEDs here. Now with that out of the way, let's get to which is best, the Samsung Q95B or the LG C2 OLED. For me, this isn't a difficult decision. I'm going with LG. As good as the Samsung is, the LG looks more true to life and organic. I'm not joking. If I hadn't unboxed this TV myself and you said, check out my new LED, I would have believed you. To me, the Samsung OLED looks like a really, really, really good LED TV, whereas the C2 looks like, well, an OLED. The Samsung's off-axis viewing is better, specifically the panel dimming and color shift in the white point when viewing off-axis, but all that aside, I still prefer the LG. Now, compared to our other reference TV, the Sony X95K Mini LED 4K, I prefer the Sony. True, contrast and image uniformity is better with the Samsung, so if you have zero tolerance for blooming, you're gonna wanna check out the Samsung. But for me, the Sony just looks better. It has a more nuanced and natural looking image, and that scaling is notably better. So if you still watch HD content, including super compressed sports, the Sony looks and performs better. Yeah, sorry, but not sorry, the Sony wins. Compared to the Samsung QN900B, which I know is an 8K display, I would choose it over the S95B reviewed here. Both TVs, they favor brightness and saturation over absolute accuracy, but the 900B, it looks sharper and more resolute when viewing lesser broadcasts. If size matters to you, the 900B is available in sizes larger than 65 inches, where you're going to be maxed out with 65 on the S95B. Yes, the 900B is expensive, probably prohibitively so, but you are getting more for your money in comparison, so I would get it over the S95B here. In the end, as good as the S95B is, I'm actually kind of about it. Maybe it's because for the better part of a year, all any of us have heard is how great a display this is. And it is a great OLED, arguably the best, especially if brightness is what you crave. But in living with it day to day, it's not a runaway winner for me. So that's it. That is now my review of Samsung's S95B QD-OLED TV, but what did you think about it?
I mean, I think we're pretty much on the same page here.
Yeah?
As far as speculating why there was so much hype surrounding this TV, I feel like this is a prime example of the specs overshadowing the actual experience of living with a product. I mean, with the earlier reviews and comments being so totally focused on the light output and what Samsung was or wasn't doing to manipulate those numbers, that maybe reviewers forgot to actually sit down and watch the darn thing. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that this is a bad TV.
No.
It's not. And there is no doubt in my mind that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be or already, because they own it, mesmerized by the brightness. But I personally found that once I got over that initial excitement of, hey, look, this thing is really bright and the colors really, really pop.
Yeah.
Other things start to become more apparent. And unless you really have this thing in your house for a while, you may not readily pick that up. And I think that the trend of reviewers who go to a showroom and review products rather than having it in their home and really living with it for a while, I think that is potentially what's at play here.
Yeah.
Just as an example, like the fact that the blacks and the shadows are incredibly crushed in order to get the screen to such bright levels, that's just unfortunate.
Yeah.
And this, to me, and I think you would agree, is partially what I feel makes the picture look less natural.
Yeah.
Like you, I prefer the LG OLED. I mean, I don't like that it's got that green cast out of the box and you have to calibrate it to an inch of its life to get it looking, having the color accuracy, get better.
Yeah.
But just from an organic standpoint, like what's going to look the most natural? It's 100% LG, and even the Sony S95K in comparison.
No, I agree. I think both the LG and the Sony are way more cinematic, where Samsung really feels like it's leaning into like this, everything kind of looks like a cutscene on a video game. Like it's so hyper realistic and crushed and saturated that, again, it does, no BS. When we plug this thing in, both of us were standing in front of it going, wow, like, holy crap, how'd they do this? And it's only after like day 2 or 3 of having it installed in the living room, and kind of, unfortunately for us and maybe for you guys, but maybe not so fortunate for Samsung, We literally have another calibrated TV less than 5-6 feet away from it. And so being able to hit play on the same content being fed to both TVs and kind of going like this, like this, like this, like this, and realizing like there's something up with the Samsung. And not like up like broken, but just like, where's that?
There's a difference.
There's a difference. Like, where's that detail I'm seeing over here that's completely gone over here?
I completely agree, and that leads me into my next point about how scaling is really the big head scratcher here. As Andrew's just talking about, if because we had 2 TVs in the room, if you watch a lot of live sports or YouTube content or maybe older movies, most of which is broadcast in HD or worse, I worry that you're going to be less than thrilled with this Samsung. We watched Texas, the men's basketball team, play Gonzaga on both the Samsung and the Sony while in the same room at the same exact time.
Yeah.
And the 85-inch Sony looked way more natural and not as digital. And anytime you have to upscale a 720p signal, which is what that was broadcast in, to a screen the size of an 85-inch, the image quality often suffers. So I was shocked. I'm not even kidding. I was shocked to see that the Sony looked so much better than the smaller Samsung. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But, listen, at the end of the day, I would not be surprised if people just flat out disagree with our review.
Oh, yeah.
Because here's the reality. People love a bright blue image. And that's something that you can get with the Samsung easily right out of the box.
Yeah. You get it more with this TV than maybe any TV we've seen this year.
And then when you put the word OLED in the model name, frankly, a lot of people, they just flat out stop listening because OLED just seems to get this automatic pass as always being the best. And while that was true, I believe in the years past, for me at least, it does not get the automatic win anymore, or it shouldn't anyway.
Yeah.
I just want to say one quick thing. Like, if you were to get this television and pay for a proper calibration, it will make the image more natural in appearance. You just may you don't be surprised if you get there and be like, oh, I don't really like it like this.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I mean, after we ran our numbers and did the measurements and calibration tests, and then it was just time to live with the TV and kind of learn the menus and see if there's any quirks, like I just struck a balance because I wanted that brighter, poppier image. I didn't want it to be as blue as it was. So I just found kind of the happy medium. And while it can be calibrated to darn near perfection, I think it was 0.5 delta E, I ultimately ended up living with a delta E that was closer to like 3, which still is calibrated, but obviously not as accurate as 0.5 because I wanted the light output.
Yeah, I think the weirdest thing to me about like when we were trying to get something that was a little closer to like the standard profile out of the box, but accurate, quote accurate. If you're watching a show or a movie or something that has African American actors,
yes,
the thing that I think you will notice is that it completely jacks with their skin tone and it turns them more red and orange, which I don't think is as natural or pleasing.
I don't think it's the intention.
I just think that's what happens.
Yeah.
If, Caucasian actors, their skin gets that boost and the light hits their face and the colors are saturated and it looks good for them.
Yeah.
But as a photographer, look, when you're photographing people of different skin color, the sensor has a harder time balancing those two skin tones if they're in the scene at the same time.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of...
You have to know what you're doing.
Yeah, you have to know what you're doing.
And
so when you're affecting those...
Well, we were playing with the dynamic contrast and dynamic brightness settings, which they do. I cannot stress this enough. As you move those, they skew the color wildly.
Right. So then we would go over to the color and try to
counter it.
Counter that. But that was really what was the most noticeable. I have a feeling if you're watching some content where you don't have a bunch of different skin tones in the scene at the same time, maybe you won't notice it as much.
Yeah.
But to me, that was the biggest negative for me. Like, I did not like what it did with the darker people with darker skin tones. It just I think I said cones, tones.
Yeah.
It didn't do them any favors.
No, darker skin, whether African American, Latin, even olive skin of more Asian descent, it just looked better on the Sony.
Yeah.
It just looked better on the Sony. All right, that is now our review of Samsung's S95B qd-oled. What did you guys think? Are we right? Are we dead wrong? You want to fight me because we don't absolutely love this television? I'm sure you've already sounded off, but just in case you haven't, now's your time to let me know in the comments. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Go ahead and ring that bell so that you're notified when new videos come out. If you use any of the links that Kristi left for you down below, know that that's a great way that you've continued to show your support for this channel and the work that we do here, and both of us thank you very much for doing that. Follow me on Instagram at Recovering Audiophile, and that's it for us today. So remember, the only person who has to like the sound or sight of your system is you. So happy listening, happy watching. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you on the next video.